Hello and welcome. And joining me today to share the stories behind the 10 books that influenced him the most on his life journey is licensed psychotherapist and shamanic healer, Dr. Stephen Farmer, who's well known as the author of several best-selling books, including Oracle Cards, Earth Magic, Animal Spirit Guides, Healing Ancestral Karma, the Earth Magic Oracle Cards, several audio recordings, and a number of popular courses as well on power animals and many other things that people have been finding very helpful in recent years. Stephen Farmer, welcome.
Well, thank you, Sandie. And as I said, been looking forward to this for some time. Thank you.
What is it about the No BS Spiritual Book Club live video events that people look forward to so much? Because lots of people say that. How is it different from what you ordinarily do?
Well, the title. I think that's the first thing, Sandie, when you contacted me was, oh, I love it. I love the title, No BS Spiritual Book Club. You know, there's a contrast between no BS and spiritual. Typically what people think, well, how can you have BS in the same title with spiritual? But it made a lot of sense to it. Like, cut to the chase. You know, let's see what, like, the underpinnings of authors such as myself and readers, you know, not just authors, but readers such as myself, you know, really have been influenced over the years. I could have given you a list of probably about 25 books, you know, but so it was a real challenge to narrow it down, you know, to 10. And I kept thinking afterwards, well, what about that one? What about that one? You know, so I've been blessed to been influenced and continue to be influenced by other people's works, you know, to different viewpoints and perspectives that have, you know, I've been really provided guidance of some sort, you know, during my soul's path, my life path.
Yeah. I think we're all in need of that. And yes, No BS Spiritual Books. It's so interesting because we're now coming towards the end of our second year. And I don't think I've had a single contributor who has listed a book that I would consider to be a BS spiritual book. So, you know, we're doing something right, and our guests are doing something right as well. That's good.
No, good.
So finding 10, I mean, what criteria did you use to pick the 10?
Well, I trusted, you know, when I think of the questions, contemplate the question, you know, what books along the way really influenced me. And as I mentioned in an email to you, there was one in particular that I went, that's not a, you know, it's not a spiritual book, but it was a book that I read, I think when I was probably about 13. And I was an avid reader at that, you know, from day one, you know, whenever I could read. So this one came my way, and it was very shocking. And I'll tell you the name of it in a sec, but it was very shocking to see the dark side of humanity and the darkest of dark side. And it was called The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. And I first rejected it, and I said, no, I can't include that. But I added it because it really was no BS. You know, you asked about a book, or you mentioned a book, no BS. I think I was just reading some stuff this morning about, you know, really including the light and the darkness, you know, to recognize the darkness here in, you know, the Northern Hemisphere. We're moving into the dark cycle of the year, but also the darkness, the shadows that we carry around. The shadows meaning those parts of us that have been repressed or shamed or put back in a sort of a bag we drag around us. And that how important it is to bring those out, to recognize and acknowledge them so they don't get splattered or projected onto other people. Yeah. So I think I mentioned in writing that too, that it awakened my inner cynic. Speaking of shadows, you know, the part that I'm very willing to look at. I don't want to dwell there, but I do think we have to acknowledge the darker side of humanity. And this is one that was in its extreme. I'm not necessarily recommending it. It's pretty dated. Like I said, I read it some years ago, but I think it's, you know, if anybody's attracted to it, yeah, look it up and check it out. It's pretty ruthless, as I would say. So I don't want to dwell on it. It's just, that's the story behind why it was chosen, even though I initially rejected it. Said, that doesn't fit. But the more I thought about it, I thought, yeah, it does. I'm going to be a little, what's the word? I'm not sure the right word for it, but a little contrary, to what might ordinarily be put on a list like this.
Well, that underscores what you've been saying. I mean, we shy away from shadow and the dark. And so we reject it and we say, oh, no, I couldn't include that book because, this is all supposed to be spiritual. But in fact, that book clearly had a major impact on you. Yeah. And most people think that the books are going to be ones that, oh, my God, I had a breakthrough. It was a blissful book. It awakened me to something. Sometimes you need a kick up the arse, and a book like that makes you recoil,
That's a good one. That's a good way to put it.
Huge impact.
It did kick my butt, I'll tell you that. Yeah. I think that this is not about a judgment so much, but I do think, like you portrayed, Sandie, is that sometimes we think of spiritual as light and fluffy and everything's okay and always think positive. And, I think generally those are good guidelines, However, I think there's also needs to be a willingness to be able to dip into, the dark and the moist, that which doesn't necessarily accord with that realm or that way of viewing spirituality. I think, even in Christianity, Jesus spent 40 days in the desert, and his soul was tortured, from what I understand. And, I think most spiritual teachers, and let me put it a different way. I just think it's important, to recognize the darkness too, and I don't intend to dwell there, but I definitely do.
There's a lot to be learned, by looking at the darkness. I mean, if you want to be a whole person, you've got to really embrace the whole and understand that we do have shadows. Yeah. And it's something that's coming up a lot lately. Many people are writing about it and talking about it in a way that hasn't been approached before. And I think that's also being echoed in the external world. We're seeing the light and we're seeing the dark.
Yeah. I mean, the intention, I think, with spirituality is to, as consciously as possible, align oneself with spirit in some way. There's no one way. No, there's no one way. Hate to break the news, folks, but there's no one way. And also to understand, I think a very significant piece is that I am spirit expressing in this physical manifestation. What I think sometimes we stick in duality is spirit is expressing through me. Yeah, but let's take it another step. Spirit is expressing as this guy named Dr. Stephen Farmer, this woman named Sandie Sedgbeer, et cetera, et cetera. Spirit is expressing as that tree, as, important word, different than through, because that takes us into this illusion of objectivity. It's useful, don't get me wrong. It's useful to step back from things and, there's nothing wrong with duality. I mean, we live in a world of duality. We got to get used to it, gang. That's the way it is. But I think in those moments of contemplative practice, whatever it may be, is to catch those moments when you really know in your body, in your heart, and your mind, all of the above, and in your soul, of the unity of all things. I've been having these experiences lately, Sandie. It's just, I love them. They're not new, but boy, what a blessing is every so often. In fact, my body, I'm getting chills, a body memory of just this happened last night, where there was just a moment where I was stopped in my track. I was walking in the park nearby, stopped in my tracks and just felt that place beyond words. The experience of no self. None of the usual self was there. It was available, and it took a few minutes or a few seconds, really, literally, to come back into that. But the more that we have those experiences, Sandie, I'm sure you can attest to this, they're reminders, that we are in truth connected, that we're related to everything. That's a philosophy and a concept, And that's useful, but it ain't enough, to put it bluntly. It's a matter of doing the work that you need to do, that you're called to do, to maintain that sense or that awareness of the masterful spirit that is all, and that we lose what we, not lose our ego, we sort of set it aside. We step out of the usual self into something much more numinous and much, bigger, and that's what's exciting, I think, in contrast to this stuff that's going on in the world, and I can only speak for the United States, what's going on here, but the divisiveness has been so rampant. And I think it's also true in other parts of the world, but I realize that my efforts and my attention needs to be towards acceptance, to recognize one's blessings, recognize with gratitude, all that you have, not what you don't have, to catch my judgments, and then reel them back in and know that they're but, I can project all my shadows onto somebody else, and stand there in judgment and, be really righteous about it. But come on, gang, let's step back from it. The idea there, and I'm going on, so forgive me, but the idea there, I think, is awareness, that we become awareness of those aspects that take us off of the path, that consciously off of the path, and then recognize it with our awareness. Oh, okay, let's get back to it. And I tell you the trick, 3 words: blessings, gratitude, and appreciation. When I get aware of that, a judgment or a dark shadow or something like that's creeping up, I take a breath. Okay, blessings. Okay, thank you for the blessings in my life. Thank you for all that I have able to. Thank you for my health. I got all my fingers and toes, that kind of thing. And then appreciating the wonders and the beauty of this incredibly tempestuous planet. So that's my general kind of sense of how to not stay on the path. I'm not sure that we can, but once we're familiar with it, and we have these experiences I described, oh, okay, I'm straying a little bit. I went off in the woods for a while, let me get back on the path, as long as I recognize I'm off in the woods.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me, Stephen, when did the light first go on for you? At what stage of your life were you aware that there was something more to be discovered, and so much more to you?
I think I didn't have words for it, but I think pretty early on, by that I mean during adolescence, I always figured I was a weird kid. I was very shy. I didn't know how to relate to other people. There's stories related to that, but anyway, I was very shy. I didn't know how to relate, socialize, etc. I was kind of awkward like that. Youngest of 4 kids, alcoholic family, and the whole thing that I've had to work with over the years. And I think there have been spots along the way where I got that there was something more, but I didn't have words for it. I didn't know what to do with it. In some cultures, when someone has the initiation of the awakening process, there are human guides, mentors, etc., that can sort of steer us along and help us out, and maybe go in the forest and do a vision quest, whatever it may be, to deepen that sense of awareness of spirit in all things. But a lot of us don't, I certainly didn't. So I had a vague recollection. And I'll tell you, I was age 19, I think, when I had the first experience of that awe. I was in a philosophy class at Golden West College, community college, 2-year college. Professor Grimes, I always remember this, he did an exercise with all of us. He had us close our eyes, took us into a meditation. And he said, now just watch the numbers going across your field of vision on your inner eye. So I'm doing that going, wow, okay, I'll go with this. Let's see what happens. Then he said this key question that was the first revelation of something more. He asked this question, Sandie. He said, okay, now, and he got us really relaxed. He said, now, what's doing the watching? Blew my mind, which, you know, sometimes is a good thing to have happen, to have your mind blown. I remember walking out a second story of the classroom. See, I get chills because I still have a body memory that long ago. Looking out over at the mountains, it was a very clear day, and the trees on the mountains. And the best word I could use for that experience, like I described, that has happened much more frequently over the years, was awe, A-W-E, awe, just a state of awe. And that's the first glimpse that I had consciously of that awe, of that. It's a glimpse is not even the right word. The glimpse is part of what initiated it, as well as the question that there was something more to me, something in me. Who was it that was doing the watching? And there was no real answer. It's kind of like a Zen koan. You know, there was really no answer to that. It's back to experience. And then subsequent to that, over the years, I think that what continued that awakening process and continued that expansiveness, frankly, was suffering. If you look at the history or talk to people, a lot of times you'll find that there was a period. I like the quote, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you know, I fear no evil. I would get to, yea, though I walk to the valley of the shadow of death, but then I didn't know where to go with it. But something, this is so interesting to me, something always would tap on the window, nudge me a little bit, or call to me in some way that started piecing it together in a different way. And then I went through, you know, some various spiritual groups, Emissaries of Divine Light. That was in my late 20s, actually in my 30s, because I was a late bloomer. I always been thought of myself as a late bloomer, and I think there's truth in it. Emissaries of Divine Light, and then I thought that was great. Everything's like of the light, you know, one of that. But it really introduced me to some. I have a tremendous gratitude towards that group, and it was like about 4-year cycles. And then I thought, yeah, what about feelings and emotions? Because they didn't really address that. And being a psychotherapist at that time, an active psychotherapist, I wondered about that. What about, how do you deal with emotions with all this spiritual stuff? And then, so I met, through a series of events, I met this people in this group in Vancouver, Canada. Wow, was it wild. And it was an offshoot of Osho. You know, they had some of the, there's a name for them, the sannyasins, I think, or something like that. And some of them had gone with this other guru type guy, but it was a very intense, if anybody's looked into Osho and some of the processes that they involved in, you know, it's very intense, very emotional, confrontive, etc. But always there's a context too, and that was the context of spirit. Anyway, so that one opened up my heart, I think, more than anything else, and embodied that spirituality. And every step along the way, and even before Emissaries, I went to the Church of Religious Science. And I remember that was recovering from a divorce. And I had 2 younger children and totally lost as to how to parent them and father them. But I remember Sandie, they would bring the children in afterwards, and I'm sitting there just like, oh, you know, crying, part of the grieving process. And then it was Emissaries, and then it was the Vancouver group, Xanthiros is what they called it. And then from there, some other kinds of things, shamanism, other kinds of experiences that just continued to amplify the absolute importance of maintaining that awakening process as much as I humanly could. So that's a long story, but that's kind of been my steps along the way.
So when it came to creating your list of books, did you do it in any particular order of, you know, my favorites, or the order that you read the books?
That's a really good question. I'm looking at the list now, and yeah, I would say basically the 10 books are in a sequence of a developmental sequence, I would say. The first one being The Way of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman. That was like, again, that's one of those eye openers, that contributed to my awakening process. I trust that some people who are listening into this, are familiar with that book. If you're not, I'd say go out and get it. It's a little dated now, but it's still a great story. His almost like a hero's journey in a way. He went down to a gas station and found a guy there that he called Socrates in the book, and he'd have parables, throughout the book too, that were like, Then the next one, and this one I love, is The Alchemist by Paulo Cohen. Again, I'm sure you and your readers are familiar with that. That's a gem. That was a real gem, is a real gem.
Yeah.
And that again is a hero's journey. Kind of like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, goes all these places and comes back, and then there's no place like home. That sort of tale that returned to the beginning in that a very clever way. Then there was A Way of the Shaman by Michael Harner. And Sandie, I had a very active psychotherapy practice, very successful. And this one, my partner at the time introduced me to, and that prompted me actually to go to an introductory course on shamanism, a 2-day course. And that's not, you don't become a shaman. I don't pretend to be a shaman. People will call me that, but I, like you said, a shamanic healer or shamanic practitioner. I'm fine with that. But it blew my mind again. I was so eager. I was like, this is it. This is my next step. And I even went to Michael Harner, who wrote the book and was also teaching this particular course, probably about 30 years ago. And I knew it was just calling to me. Like I said, it's not an ambition. I was just saying, dude, I'm up to him. I'm like a little jackrabbit jumping around him in a way. And I went, Mike, what can I do next, Michael? I do the 3-year program because they have a 3-year program. And if not that, what else can I do? And he's like he's almost like going, whoa, boy, you're holding the reins in. I was so on fire with it. And then after that, I took other trainings and courses, some from his and his wife's Foundation for Shamanic Studies, that offered several varieties of courses for what he called core shamanism, and then went on Tibetan shamanism, Celtic shamanism, Huna, which is Hawaiian shamanism. And I could see the threads that were common, through these various trainings. The Cosmic Serpent. Wow, you guys who are listening, if you have not read it, go read it. The subtitle is I'm going to read it.
DNA and the origins
of knowledge.
Yeah.
That's a
Jeremy
big
Narby.
book. Yeah, Jeremy Narby, who Canadian author who anthropologist, straightforward anthropologist. He went down to the jungle in South America, and like many people are doing today, more and more people are doing today, sampled the brew there, ayahuasca, that has been used for thousands of years as a shamanic medicine, and had an awakening, kept seeing serpents, decided to investigate, and did a real research study and discovered how many cultures have snakes or serpents as part of their cultural mythos, if you will. And one thing led to another, and what he suggested is that shamans back when would they didn't know about DNA or anything like that, but they would often see images of serpents intercoiled, 2 serpents intercoiled. And that was their analog. That's what they could refer to because they're familiar with snakes or serpents in their culture. And so they were already seeing DNA, but they didn't have the name for it or the science for it. It was like serpents. And look at, I don't know about in the UK, but I know in America, the US specifically, the AMA, the American Medical Association, if you look at that insignia, there's 2 serpents. Yeah. Same thing with the Canadian Medical Association. So anyway, that was very significant. Sapiens, I won't say a lot about that. A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari. That was a great tracing, a brief history, like he says. And I would highly recommend that. Again, many people's favorite, The Four Agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz.
Comes up again and again, along with The Alchemist.
Yeah. And I like simple things like that. Give me 4 guidelines to how I can do this thing called life, and that's one of my favorites. The one that I think we get stuck on is don't take anything personally. I love that. Like, you mean that driver was not specifically targeting me to cut in front of me? Right, Stephen. Right.
Yeah.
A more recent book, I guess this is really out of sequence. In fact, let me go in sequence here. I mentioned The Rise of Paulo, the Third Reich. Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine. Levine has developed a trauma recovery process that he's called somatic experiencing. And being a body-oriented psychotherapist, it immediately attracted me. And I read the book and I went, this guy's he knows something about trauma. And so I actually did a lot of training. I did a 3-year program, some other workshops with him and some of his associates. And I was always a body-oriented therapist as it was, Sandie. But this one really brought it home. It really deepened my understanding of trauma and also, more importantly, how to recover. And of course, we see that more and more these days. People are talking about trauma. I think it's great. In fact, an interesting sidelight, my very first book 30 years ago, which I reissued, was a book on childhood trauma. What I knew then, and now the information and knowledge has expanded greatly. The title, I wish I'd changed it, but it was a good title at the time, Adult Children of Abusive Parents. And that was the time when there were the popularity of adult children of alcoholics. So a friend of mine who coached me in my first book, thank you, Alan, suggested that. And I went, yeah, that makes sense. Wrote the book, published it, it did well, and then revised it just about 4 years ago.
Let me just ask you a couple of questions
Please.
here, because I have an astrologer friend who, talks about trauma. And she said, every child is going to suffer trauma, every child of some kind, at some degree. And that in many cases, what she tells people when they come to her for consultations is, if you can understand that your parents loved you in blue and you wanted to be loved in yellow, then that might, and obviously we're not talking about really severe, physical, sexual, whatever, really severe kind of traumas. But, many people feel that they do carry some trauma because of something in their childhood. And I always thought that was a great way to help people understand, that generally our parents do love us and they are doing the best that they can. But they're not doing it in the way that we can experience it as being loved.
They're doing it in yellow. I like that.
Yeah.
I think ultimately that's what I would want someone to get to, that point of basically truly and sincerely forgiving their parents, really getting it, you could say, seeing that their parents were infallible human beings.
Yeah.
And sometimes though that's hard to do when you got a lot of roadblocks.
Yeah.
And so some of whatever methodologies, that you incorporate in and doing a healing process with any residual post-traumatic symptoms. I don't like to call it a disorder, even though I'll use the term PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. It's not a disorder. It's an amazing adaptability, to the situations you were raised in. If you survived, congratulations. Now you got some work to do, to get through some of the trauma and ultimately see your parents, like you said, rather than try to force them or think of them as being blue, to really see that they were not just, again, it could be a concept, but to really feel deeply. I often say that about forgiveness is, if you're not ready, don't do it, because just mouthing the words isn't the whole ball of wax, it's not the whole thing. It's like really going, having those revelations, those moments of insights about the fallibility, knowing that my mother was incredibly abused, 2 older brothers, probably sexually abused as far as I can ascertain, that there was a threat of addiction in my father's side of the family, my father being alcoholic, my having to deal with my own addictive processes from time to time as I was growing up. And seeing that, rather than blaming them, moving into understanding and appreciating. The other thing is, Sandie, that I think that we have to recognize, if you take a V shape of your lineage, mom, dad here, grandma, grandpa, both of them here, etc., 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 all the way back, you recognize that, wow, as Linda Hogan, a Native American writer, said, you are the result of the love of thousands. You know, it might sound crazy to say love of thousands, but certainly the influence, what made you, is just so multiply determined. It wasn't just your parents. It ain't just your parents. It's not just your grandparents. You know, it goes back much deeper than that. At times when people didn't have resources like we do today.
Yeah.
The blessing to have those resources today.
And they certainly didn't have any idea about the psyche. You know, I mean, you know, people thought they were being a good parent to put a roof over your head and food in your stomach. If they could get you educated, so much the better. But nobody thought about the emotional,
Right.
you know, and the psychological, and you know, the perceptual reality that one lives with. It just wasn't available at that time.
Yeah, no, it wasn't available. There's another book that really doesn't quite fit on the list anyway, called For Your Own Good by Alice Miller. And this is, again, a dated book. It was probably written or published, I should say, about 25 years ago, but it was an eye-opener too. She did an analysis of Nazi Germany and how did that happen? And just a couple of threads of it is the emphasis on the father. You know, speaking of patriarch, you know, the father's authority was solid. That's it. And so, what was Hitler's name? Der Führer. You know, he was the leader of the fight. You don't disobey. And that, you can take it from there, but that was the premise of this book. And she did an excellent analysis of that. In other words, the child rearing practices she pointed to, really, she said that was a large factor in the cause of the immense tragedies, you know, that took place in before and during and after World War II, even after to some degree. So yeah, the parents didn't have the resources then. They were taught a certain way to raise children: feed them, put them to sleep, give them a place to sleep. You know, do the best you can with that. Maybe love them too, you know, if you can do so. But parents, grandparents, or those of previous generations may not have had the capability of doing that.
So did Peter Levine's book, I mean, did it help you heal your own trauma?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. In a few words, the premise is that because of our instinctual ability to adapt, because that's the purpose of instinct, to survive, what happens when we're traumatized, and you made this point, is it's a matter of degree, but still trauma's trauma. Unlike, I think it's an overused word sometimes, you know, I was traumatized because my computer broke down. No, that's not trauma. That's inconvenience. You know, we face a lot of inconveniences, and I advise, don't call them traumas. Trauma is like when you're shamed, you know, so deeply that something changes in you. You start to freeze up in some parts of your body. And of course, when the more extreme sexual, physical abuse, even emotional abuse, you know, which doesn't have, you know, a concrete physical source, but it does get into the body and the soul. But these parts freeze up. Even in a traffic accident, they freeze up. You know, if I was hit, I'm a passenger and I was hit from the side and you're asking me about it, I might go, yeah, boy, it was, and my right arm goes up in a replication of the way that my body behaved during that traffic accident. Now, childhood trauma is a whole different ballgame. It's that these things, we don't have the adaptability. We don't have the resources to be able to like talk to a friend about it. Don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. That was another banner back in the 80s, with adult children of alcoholics and abusive parents, etc. In the family dynamic, you just don't talk about these things and you shut down your feelings. But what happens then is the freeze of the energy that was required to freeze during the childhood abuse, whatever the nature of it was, will get locked in the body, especially if it's repeated. So then what we want to do with somatic experiencing is learn ways to unfreeze it. And what you don't want to do is unfreeze it all at once. There's a term in dentistry called titrate. You just do a little bit and then a little bit more and then come back, to, a pleasant sunlight, in the sky. And then, so your body learns to accommodate your feelings in a different way. There's a lot more to it, but that's the essence of it, is to basically want to unfreeze the freeze. So yeah, it really helped me because, again, I was a body oriented, pretty alert. As you noticed a couple of times, I said, oh, there's a body memory. Yeah. I think more and more we need to, speaking of spirituality, is include the body in that. Yes. That the body was such a messenger in so many ways. Danger. Okay, what happens? My shoulders go up, I stop breathing. I have to assess immediately, just like wild animals. In fact, that's why he called it waking the tiger. He made that parallel between how wild animals behave instinctually under threat. We know about fight, flight, but there's another one: freeze, collapse, or get so aggressive that it leads to violence to others. Anybody who does violence, put money on it. They were abused. They experienced and or witnessed violence.
Yeah, for sure. So tell me about braiding sweetgrass. That was one of your books, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge.
Have you come across it, Sandie?
No, I haven't. That's why I'm curious to know more.
Robin Wall, she's an elegant writer. I mean, she's really a good writer. And her work is that she's a Native American, and I don't know if I can say it right, but of the Powhatan tribe, and a ecologist at the same time. What a beautiful blend. So she writes from those lenses, from those perspectives. And the title comes from that her community, the Native American community, often they would go out and they in a very sacred fashion, reap some of the sweetgrass. And then they would spend a lot of time braiding that. And sweetgrass is used in ceremony at times, just like sage or palo santo. Sage is when you heard of smudging. It actually has an antibacterial effect, by the way. But it's also done in a sacred fashion just to sort of clear the aura or the energy field. Cedar does the same thing. And so once you've swept away, it's also supposed to clear out negativity. And then you introduce sweetgrass, braided sweetgrass. And what that is that's more of a calling herb. You're calling in the spirits, and it has a very pleasant aroma to it. In addition, that being used in sacred ceremonies. So Robin Wall-Kimmerer, the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, goes through a number of, I don't know, it's hard to do it in 25 words or less, but she describes, the characteristics in depth of, let's say, a pond, and what happens when the pond gets polluted, and how can you unpollute it? Things like that are very timely from her perspective. I'm reading something from Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. I went, well, that's not right. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Okay. I want to just read a piece. Like Sweetgrass, she weaves tales of both grief and hope. Grief at the losses of native plant and animal species, and hope that this can be corrected with a mixture of scientific knowledge, and as the title indicates, indigenous wisdom and plant teachings. I think it's interesting, Sandie, that up to maybe just a relatively few decades ago, that we still held this kind of cultural view of brown people, Native Americans, that they were primitives. You know, there was a sort of an arrogant sort of a label that we put on them. And I think in a sense, now we're going to them with our clipboards. You know, what can you teach us? And I think that's a great clipboard, braiding sweetgrass. Good one. Highly recommended. Highly recommended.
Yeah, there's a lot we can learn from the indigenous peoples.
Yep.
Isn't it interesting how we always reject something that has come before us, but then later on, as we get wiser, we look to find it.
Yeah. I laugh. I don't know if some of your readers have heard of the Far Side cartoons.
Yes.
And they're some of my favorite because his sense of humor is sometimes dark, but it tells something too. But there's one cartoon that I love where you see like an open field, and then you see a naked man and woman running, and where they're running from is a bottle that they were in has dropped and broken. And you see God's voice, you know, on the overhead. You don't see God, of course, but you see God's voice, and it just says, uh-oh. It makes me laugh because, yeah, uh-oh. Humans somewhere along the line developed a self-reflective consciousness. I think one of the best metaphors I've seen of that is that opening to the movie years ago, 2001 Space Odyssey, where you see the apes fighting over a water hole, and then there's this intervention that takes place, and suddenly they look at a bone and it becomes a tool and a weapon, both. And something, people have different ideas, theories, downloads, etc., from spirit guides, etc., as to how this happened. But, you know, basically we're still in monkey bodies. You know, we still have these instinctual drives, this fear and aggression and flight and withdrawal and all this. I really, my sense during this pandemic too, is that a lot of people are that, you know, withdrawn. You know, social distancing has become social alienation, unfortunately. I'm not saying good, bad, otherwise. It's just, there is that.
It's become a safe haven in a way for some people, or they think it is.
Yeah.
You know, if I withdraw, I'll be safe, and they don't think about the things that, you know, they're losing by withdrawing.
When the animal part of us feels trapped, that's the first recourse, is to escape. Yeah. And that's one way to escape, is just pull in, withdraw, keep to yourself, you know, that kind of thing. It's sad. The other recourse, if you can't escape in some way, of course, is aggression. Yeah. And we're seeing a lot of that. It's always been there, you know, it's not new, but I think we're seeing an extraordinary amount. 30%, the rate of murders per year has jumped 30% in this past year, as an example. Yeah. So, but again, I appeal to us, you know, is to not play that game, you know, as much as we can. Love and compassion, another key words, you know, again, could be a concept, philosophy, but what about expressing just a simple kindness? I was just rereading. I must say I don't consider myself Christian. Yeah, I had some exposure to it, you know, early on in my childhood, and I think there's some great messages, you know, in the Bible. I really do. Like, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, like I mentioned earlier. I just was reading, rereading, I guess, a person's take on the tale that's in the Bible of the Good Samaritan. I thought that was pretty inspiring. Yeah, you know, people would pass him by. Oh, poor guy, he's half dead, you know. And this guy comes that was very, apparently for the Jews, you know, was viewed as very, no good. But he actually is the one that helped him find food, get better, etc. And I thought, wow, what a great message. You know, it doesn't matter the source, it happens to be the Bible, but a good message is to just make a little bit more of an effort to be loved, to express that love and compassion. You don't need to go around kissing everybody and saying, I love you, I love you, I love you. You know, generous acts, our actions often speak much more louder, as has been said, than our words. You know, can I be kind? Can I be kind to animals? Can I be kind to the plant people? You know, the tree people. You know, we need more of that in the world. So let's see. I'm going to do my best to do that.
Yeah. So instead of withdrawing, just, you know, take a step forward and see what happens. You know, it strikes me, I mean, the turn that the conversation has taken is that your last book, the last book on your list, is one that might help an awful lot of people right now, just to have a different kind of experience and perspective.
Yeah, the last one being one of my favorite authors, Michael Pollan. You know, I was introduced to him with a book called The Omnivore's Dilemma. And the thing about Pollan is that's cool is he doesn't just write about, you know, he goes and participates and experiences.
Yes.
And this latest book, I highly recommend, How to Change Your Mind.
Yeah.
Brilliant title based on what's in the book. And it's basically, you know, I'm a child of the 60s. I confess, you know, I sampled the different psychedelics that were available to me in my college days. And then after my college, I just quit. You know, I didn't do anything anymore. But I had a significant experience, which I won't go into because it's too lengthy. But basically, I was called to use what sometimes are called magic mushrooms as a sacred medicine. And that's a whole different perspective, a whole different paradigm. And briefly, it changed my life. I wrote the story in one of my books, Healing Ancestral Karma. So if anybody wants to read it, they can go there. But again, still at that time, this was 20 some years ago, almost 25 years ago. Again, part of the shamanic, it was a shamanic initiation. It was still kind of hush hush. You know, you don't talk about it. Those are drugs. Well, truly, gang, no, they're not. They're what he calls is termed, and what often is termed psychedelics. Certain ones are been used for thousands of years, like ayahuasca I mentioned earlier. Jeremy Narby, Michael Harner, too, went to South America. And Sandie, I heard 25 years ago or so, I heard, you know, the new spirituality is going to come from South America. I thought, wow, interesting. And I'll be darned, here we are 25 years later, and that's what's happening. There's even a series I haven't watched yet, Psychedelics Revealed, you know, that outlines some of this. Anyway, Michael Pollan goes through an examination of, an exploration of psychedelics, specifically a lot about psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in mushroom, some about ayahuasca, some about MDMA, and does a whole exploration, and then has an experience with psilocybin with somebody who was a sitter, you could call him, that sort of guided the journey to some extent with music, etc. Not conversation, but music, etc. He had a great experience with it. What we're finding now that's fascinating is people with PTSD are now being treated with things like MDMA, which isn't technically a psychedelic or a plant medicine, it's not, but with MDMA, with ayahuasca, and with magic mushrooms. I'm just calling them mushrooms, and getting great results. You know, you can do a search on the internet, you'll find some information there and testimony from people who have gone through this. Now, typically, unlike back in the 60s where you did something and then just like whatever happened, often is there's a guide, you know, that helps you through that experience, because it can bring up some pretty deep emotions as well as change your perspective. And I think that's the key. I believe they were back when, and they still are, a Schedule I substance in the United States. In other words, that's along with heroin, cocaine, etc., which is frankly stupid. I've always thought that's been stupid. No, they're not Schedule I. But I read something at that time that said the culture, or the not the culture so much, but the powers that be wanted to keep it outlawed. Why? Because it changed your consciousness.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You think differently. You start to see the world differently. You start to see what's across the veil and experience what's across the veil. Oh my God, God forbid people are going to think for themselves. Oh, not good. And I'm, there we go, body memory. I'm a bit of a closet rebel, in that I don't always accord with the popular culture. I'm not even sure I'm a closeted rebel anymore, but I look pretty normal. A friend of mine made the distinction. He said he's an outlaw. He said there's a difference between an outlaw and a criminal. And I like that distinction. It's like, well, I'm not quite an outlaw, but, I have my ways, shall we say, about me. But up till maybe a few years ago, even the kind of stuff that I've been writing, was not necessarily something that would appeal to a lot of people. And now, like, a lot of people are interested in shamanism. I do a mentorship. People come to me and want to learn about some of the basics of shamanism, or advanced, as the case may be. And I welcome it. Michael Harner said something, I remember, in the 3-year program. I can't remember what the question was that was asked, but he said, as long as people are doing what they're doing to the earth, I'm going to teach as many people as possible about shamanism. And I always remembered that, because the shamanic, and it doesn't even have to be, you don't have to be a practice, you don't have to be a practitioner or healer, but some of the ideas and technologies, funny word to use with shamanism, but some of the techniques and methodologies of shamanism are useful for just personal day-to-day life, that keeps you in touch with a more, I would say, Sandie, a more comprehensive spirituality. In other words, it incorporates the earth. Yeah. It's just about dwelling here in the upper world. It's about being able to deal with the spirits that are expressing as these various beings. Dear friend is Eva Blacktail Swan, Cherokee medicine woman. She goes out on the land. They've got like a 70-acre ranch. Her and her man that she calls the cowboy have a buffalo ranch, and also has a barn where she does ceremony, etc. She goes out every morning and listens to the cloud people. Notice how there's an implication with that relationship. Listens to the buffalo people, and then etc., and then goes back in and writes down the download, what was expressed to her through this particular spirit being. And I get those missives every day. Every day. She's been doing it for like 40 years, every day. And I cherish people like that are tuning into spirit in these different expressions, and being able to communicate, what they have received, so that more can benefit. It's very much in alignment with my mission, what I see as my purpose here on earth and my mission. I've got some new products coming out, publications coming out before too long. Another book on animals that are stories that people have submitted about their experiences. Again, inspirational. An oracle card deck coming out in a month. Messages from the ancestors. And that was fun and challenging to do. And then down the road, probably sometime next spring, is messages from the spirits of nature. Basically saying, you too can do this. Yeah. The cards are always a vehicle. Oracle cards are always a vehicle, but let's go to one of the foundational principles of shamanism. Whether you work with archangels, ancestors, animals, plants, whatever, is direct revelation, that you can get guidance and information and even healing directly from that particular being or the spirit of that being. And that's really exciting. It's like it brings, we call it the new age. It's the old age.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you're very well known for your power animal, spirit animal books and cards, etc. I mean, obviously that's something that grew out of your shamanic work.
Absolutely.
What is it, about power animals that attracts people so much? Do you think that there is, you keep talking about body memory, but do you think there is some kind of soul memory that people carry, that they remember when they were so connected to the earth and to the animal kingdom?
Yeah, I think a very easy answer: ancestors, the ancestral memories that are buried within us. I often say that what we call past life memories, I'm more and more suspicious those are ancestral memories, that have come down, have come down through the ancestral V, if you will, the lineage in some way, back to the deepest ancestry you can imagine, Sandie. A simple example is the old Hawaiian beliefs about these sort of things. Believe that the taro plant is the original ancestor. Put your head around that one. Who came first? Wasn't humans, wasn't animals. It was from the sea, and then plants, and then somehow the animals showed up, and then somehow this ape got up and walked. Go figure how that happened. So in answer to your question, more direct answer is, I think, first of all, that most of us have some care, love, affinity towards animals. They like this mammal that's sitting over here called a dog. Pretty much his physiological functioning is pretty much the same. Food goes in, goes out, exercise, breathing, there's a lot of things. So we have more of an affinity to animals. Let's say we might view plants in a certain way, but we don't necessarily, we see them as a source of sustenance, more than anything else typically. But that plant gives its life, so that we can continue ours. If you're an omnivore, that animal has given its life so that we can continue ours. And then there's the animals that not necessarily give their lives, but that we can relate to and we understand. We see them in story after story. Wizard of Oz comes to mind, the Cowardly Lion. Yeah. There's this book I'm working on. I outline all of the various ways that animals show up in our life, even sports teams. Some of our American sports teams, Philadelphia Eagles, we tag them with, some sort of animal name. Yeah. I don't know, in the UK, does anything come to mind where, let's say, soccer team, football,
No.
I wonder about that. But yeah, anyway, I know in Australia, the Sydney Roosters, comes to mind. But my point is, let's back to spirit animals. What often happens is that we're drawn to something more, in whatever way it was. And one of the simplest ways to relate the fact, the truth about spirit, is through the animal guides. And what I teach is that when an animal shows up in an unusual way and or repeatedly in a short space of time, there's something pretty big going on. There's three tiers. First, the physical animal, just the one of flesh and bones and stuff like that. The eagle that I see, okay? The fox that runs across the forest. Second is there's another layer that's the life force or the spirit of that particular animal, that animates that animal just like it animates us. So we could call that spirit of the life force. The third one is where it gets interesting, is when an animal shows up the way it's God's or spirit's way of connecting with you through a particular vehicle that will afford a message for you of some sort. I'll give you an example. I look up and, whoa, there's an eagle, that's flying high. Okay. And I remember Dr. Farmer's words. I go, okay, there's something going on here. So I close my eyes and I ask not just the life force of the eagle, not just the physical animal. He's kind of a sales rep. He's showing up to say, hey, pay attention. But what I want to address is what you might call the oversoul or the collective consciousness of all eagles that's showing up in this particular physical form. That's a pretty big deal. And it just is a matter of opening one's awareness to that possibility. And I encourage people just to experiment with it. And you can look up ways to do this on the internet. You can get one of my books. It's all, it's available as to how we can tune into that. So I close my eyes and I say, eagle, not an eagle, because that's the physical, but Eagle implies the spirit, the oversoul. Eagle brother or eagle, what message do you have for me? I'll do that right now. I'll just do it right, spontaneous. I hear, because that's often how I receive messages, Sandie. I have to close my eyes again to recapture it. Keep your perspective and don't get lost in your words. Keep your perspective and don't get lost in your words. And then I may contemplate that for a while and think, well, what's that really mean? You know, keep your perspective. I can understand that as don't get boggled down in words. I'm working with a lot of words and I'm finishing a writing project. So that's actually, now that I think about, see what happens? Now that I think about it a little bit, it's like it makes sense. Don't get lost in them, you know, be able to step back and then go forward, but step back and go forward. Thank you, Eagle. And that's the other thing, is always thank the spirit animal. Power animal is a whole different deal. That's like that's a spirit animal that there's a few ways that it can come to you, but it sticks with you often for years. And often it's...
Is that when we have a particular affinity for a particular kind of animal? You know, a hippo or a giraffe or something like that, and we're always drawn to them and say they're our favorites?
That is one way, and in fact, that's a really good way, is if you found that, like I knew a guy that he had an elephant pins, he had statues of elephants, you know, and he said, yeah, it's been that way the last 20 years. I just have this thing about elephants. Had no idea what spirit animals or anything were. But we had a conversation, and that's where I led to suggesting that perhaps it's his power. Now, when you have had an animal come to you in that way repeatedly over time, here's the best way to find out, is it your power animal? Most likely it is, you know, I put money on it. But the best way is close your eyes, take a deep breath, and imagine, let's say eagle again, eagle before you. And just say, eagle, telepathically, are you my power animal? And you'll get a yes or a no. Try it, you know, try it. That's the way it works. And they'll let you know. Again, most likely it is. That's one way. Another is a shamanic process of retrieving the power animal. Often a spirit animal, and again, may show up in a physical form, but a spirit animal will show up repeatedly in a short space of time, more as an animal spirit guide. You know, that they tend to be there briefly, go on, and then maybe, you know, 2 years later, that similar thing happens. I'm talking about a power animal that provides guidance, protection, healing. And you learn to work with them. It becomes a collaborative process. You collaborate with this spirit animal that is a source of power. What's their medicine? You know, might be one way to describe it. I just wrote a piece on Coyote Medicine, and it's too long to go into, but a few years back, I live in a fairly suburban neighborhood. And I took my dog out for a walk, and I look over across, not too far from me on the street, and there's a coyote trotting along, and then disappeared in one of the canyons. So I asked Coyote what was the message. And again, without going into the whole story, it was about deceit, that there was someone deceiving me. And also a reminder of how easy I am. You know, I trust easily. And sometimes I have to be aware of that, you know, not be so reflectively, reactively trusting. You know, it's a good thing. I'm a trusting person. And then a third piece he told me was, you have this shadow called Mr. Nice Guy. And you are nice, but sometimes there's a shadow of that niceness where you allow yourself to be taken advantage of. And then you end up feeling victimized. And so he's basically saying, get over it. Yeah. You know, great message. Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit about, not a power animal. He was a temporary visitor, you know, that passed along a very significant message.
Mm-hmm. Out of all of your 10 books, is there one that stands out above all the others for you? You know, one that you would recommend to many people that they read, or is a particular favorite?
You know, the one that, as I review, you know, some of the publications, I think I wrote 4 books as a therapist, self-help type books, and then didn't publish or write or publish anything for several years. And then I made that transition, initiation to shamanism. And the first book out of the chute, when I started working with shamanic realities, is a book called Sacred Ceremony. And I would say if I had to choose one, like your question, I think that would be it. You know, don't get me wrong, I like the others too. They each have their own value.
Yeah.
Earth Magic, good book. Not as strong, I would say, as Sacred Ceremony, but some good information in it. And part of it is because it was a tumultuous time in my life when I wrote it. I turned in my editor. He came back with like about 15 pages of edits. Had to turn this around, everything. It was a mess when I turned it in. God bless good editors. But yeah, Sacred Ceremony, the latest one, Healing Ancestral Karma, I would put as number 2.
Well, that's another topic that's getting very hot now.
Yes.
You know, a lot of people are looking at healing their lineage, and you know.
Yeah, so I'd recommend that if anyone's interested in looking at it from that lens and working with it. There's some exercises in it. They're quite powerful. So those 2, I'd say Sacred Ceremony, Healing Ancestral Karma, in that order.
So they're the favorites of your books. What about the 10 books that you've given us? Do you have a favorite among them?
Oh my goodness, you asked tough questions, Sandie, but I will answer. I would say if I had to choose, oh man, that's a tough one. Yeah, give me 10 seconds here. I'll come up with one. Favorite. I would pin, it would be a close tie between Miguel Ruiz, The 4 Agreements, because it's so simple and so profound at the same time. That's definitely a favorite. The other one is A Cosmic Serpent. I tell everybody about that and hope they read. I'll give you a short story on that one. Snake is the first spirit animal that came to me that turned out to be a power animal. I had no idea what the meaning was, you know, the depth of the layers of meaning. And the more I looked at it, the more I worked with snake, always with me when I'm doing healing work. Therapeutic, psychotherapeutic, or shamanic, and I've got a good medicine bag full. So much so, it has affected me so much so. I'm so grateful for Snake, who now sometimes goes by the name Two Snakes, Intertwined Serpent, that he has been always available and helpful, working in both direct ways and subtle ways with clients that are wanting some sort of a healing process. And I got to tell you, it was so profound and has followed me throughout my life for over 30 years since I did this men's event, even before I knew about shamanism, that I marked my birthday with my one and only tattoo. Want to see it?
Sure. Yeah.
You can't see it, you know, from this angle, but Jeremy Narby is a friend of mine from Australia. He's half Aboriginal. His father's Aboriginal. Gifted artist, as well as plays the didge like incredibly, didgeridoo. Actually took and did a painting that is also in one of my oracle card decks, the Earth Magic Oracle cards. Good deck, by the way. And it's DNA is the title, and then the keyword is karma. You know, again, what follows, you know, down the V to you to make up you. So really good question, man. I put, there's about 4 of them all together. I put on there 4 or 5, but
you know, you're talking about snakes. The word serpent is a very loaded word, and most people, very negative in many instances. And
sure.
Snakes are probably the most feared and maligned creatures. So I wonder whether there's something there that goes a lot deeper than we think, you know, that snakes represent a part of us that we're afraid of.
DNA, you know, that's the first thing that comes to mind. Also, the story that I came across some years ago, and I can't remember precisely the community or the Native American community, but the story someone said, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. But here's a good story. I believe it's true, is that there was a time when someone in the tribe was called to be a healer. And so their test was the community would gather around in circle around the fire, and that person would dance around the fire. And what they would do is they'd throw in a few rattlesnakes. And if the person was bitten by the snake and survived, they were considered to be a great healer. Isn't that a great story?
And if they weren't bitten?
They were, yes, they were bitten.
No, but what would happen if they were not bitten?
Well, that I don't know. Again, I don't know.
It's a bit like, in the old days when they used to duck witches, oh dear, if she doesn't float, then she actually wasn't a witch, but too late, she's dead.
Yeah, that's so true. So yeah, I imagine that if they were somehow able to survive this, they were going, well, nice try, dude, Yeah. It ain't happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Stephen, we're pretty much out of time now. It's been lovely to talk with you about your 10 best books and everything else that you've shared with us as well. It's been very rich. And I want to thank you for adding your 10 best spiritual books to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations. This is an ever-growing library, and it's so interesting to see all of the different titles that are sitting now in that archive, and how many of them get repeated again and again and again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're welcome, Sandie. It's been a pleasure. And I just put in a shameless plug, go to my website, drstephenfarmer.com. Any of you want to learn more about me.
I was going to do that for you, but you've done it for yourself.
Well,
so
you.
That's good.
That's because my coach tells me to do that.
Okay.
I'm not very good at marketing. So there's my shameless plug.
It's good for you to do it. I'm sure a lot of people do forget to do it for you. So it's just as well to get it in.
Yeah. And thank you all for listening too. I appreciate it. Anything you can write me or questions or anything like that. I'll do my best to respond as quickly as I can. Sandie, I think you're doing a great service. I just want to tell you that. I have a lot of respect for you. That you're exposing, others to some of these incredible works. And like you said, repeatedly, Miguel Ruiz, The Four Agreements. You haven't read that? Yeah.
Yeah. It just may be, I haven't counted lately, but it just may be the top one. Yeah.
I bet.
Comes up again and again and again. The thing I like about that book is you could give it to anybody to read. Yeah. It doesn't have to be somebody on a spiritual path, anybody.
Exactly.
And it's the perfect, book to give a young person starting out in their life.
Yeah.
Use that as your guide and you can't go wrong.
Good idea. I should get a stack of them, and give them out as, as becomes appropriate. No, that's good to know. And I met him. I actually got a hug from him, and he's so humble. That's another thing I think. Very unpretentious. He's done some great work in it, but he has an incredible amount of humility.
Yes, he does. He does
great work. So,
yeah, I've interviewed him and his sons, and they're the same.
Yep, they're coming along. Yeah, they're taking up where Papa, was going. Papa's kind of slowing down. He's getting older, and he's not retired, but he's getting down. So now, his sons are on their way. Don Jose and Don
Miguel Jr.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you, Stephen. To you at home, thank you for watching. And you can see the videos in this series on the video page at the NoBSSpiritualBookClub.com, where you can also sign up to our newsletter and be the first to know who's coming up next. And you can download all of these interviews as podcasts on iTunes, Spotify, Anchor, Amazon, Audible, and many other podcast platforms. That's it for this week. I'll be back again next week at the same time with another episode of the No BS Spiritual Book Club's 10 Best Spiritual Books lists. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.